All companies are being disrupted right now. Like if you look at AI, we are in a time of insane creativity, and the machines are going to disrupt everything. There's always someone smaller and scrappier than you that you can learn from, and to not being so traditional or so rigid about reaching out to people for connection. Just DM someone.
At Mechanism, we build iconic brands with soul and science. The soul is culturally relevant brand building, and the science is the always-on marketing activities that drive the bottom line. Learn more at mechanism.com. Welcome to the Soul and Science podcast, Erika Badan. Erika, you are the CEO of Food52. You're really known as really a powerhouse and a change agent. And today, I'm really excited to talk to you about the soul and science of disrupting an industry and scaling a business. Obviously, you disrupted sports media with Barstool. You quickly scaled that up. And now you're disrupting the traditional model of, I guess, cooking and home goods with Food52. So we have a lot to talk about. I can't wait to dive into the soul and science of scale and disruption. Erika, first question. Tell me your origin story, how you started. Did you always know you were going to be the CEO and run various companies? Or did that sort of, take its own course? Or how did you start out? What did you want to do when you grew up?
Okay, origin story. No, short answer is no. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was born in Colorado. I grew up in New Hampshire and Vermont. My mom was a teacher and my dad was my high school principal, which gave me a funny relationship with authority, I would say. But it did teach me to love to learn, and I went to a liberal arts college. I drank my face off. I played as many sports as I possibly could. I knew I wanted to better myself. I knew that I didn't want to grow up and live in New Hampshire. That I was very sure of. Beyond that, I'm not sure that I was sure of much. When I went to Colby College, and my junior year, I had an internship at Fidelity Investments in Boston. And that, I think, for me was the first wake-up call that I really wanted to be in business. I don't think before that I would have necessarily thought that I wanted to be in business. I liked money, so I always liked to work. I had associated working hard with making money, which meant that I could buy things that I want. I liked that.
How did you get that first Fidelity gig? Was that like a connection or?
No, it was definitely not a connection. I think I'm the only person in my family that has a corporate job to this day. But I knew I wanted to live in Boston that summer, the summer of my junior year. And I knew I needed to work to be able to afford the rent. And I also, I think secretly I'd always wanted to work in advertising. I grew up watching the show 30 something. I was obsessed with 30 something, which no one who listens to this will have ever heard of, but it's a great show about an ad agency.
Great show. Yeah.
It was a great show. But I really just applied to 1,000 places. I applied every place I possibly could that I could ride the T to, and ended up getting the internship at Fidelity. I had good grades. I was at the top of my class. I worked hard in school, and I think I could write a compelling reason why someone should hire me. And that's really how I got it was a fluke. That's how I got the job.
Uh-huh. And then when you got out of school, what was your first job?
I went back to Fidelity. So I had a job as a receptionist, and then I got a job in the legal department, both at Fidelity. And once I joined the legal department, I was making $50,000 a year, which I felt like was an exorbitant amount of money in the late 90s. I still kind of do. And I was so bored, though. I hated it. I didn't want to be I had thought I might want to be a lawyer because I was in the legal department. And then the more time I spent there, the more I didn't like it. It was about risk. It was about rules. I write about this a lot in my book. Everything was beige. I don't think people in their 20s should feel beige. And so I jumped from that group to work in the ad group at Fidelity, which was really, I think, the first job I fell in love with, which was lucky. That was my second job, my second-ish job. And once I started working in advertising, I really never looked back. I always wanted to work with brands. I always wanted to build things. I always wanted to work in the internet. And my career has really been the manifestation of all those things.
In high school, did you ever get sent to the principal's office?
No, didn't get sent to the principal's office. I would definitely get drunk and go to sporting games. Like there'd be like a Friday night basketball game, and I would go with all my friends, and then I would see my dad across the gym, and I'd be like, shit. But I somehow evaded the principal's office.
I'm putting you on the spot, but what makes you particularly good at what you do?
I work really hard at it. I have a big engine. Like I have a gear that I can get into to figure things out. I think I have a lot of stamina, and I really like people. I think I'm intuitive with people.
As CEO, you're really the captain leading the ship. What do you find that you need other executives to come in and do? What are your weaknesses that you need people to cover up?
Oh, yeah. I have a ton of weaknesses. I need people around me. I like to have people around me who are insanely good at math. So I like quants. I like to be surrounded by people who can rock a pivot table and who think in terms of financial models. I tend to spend more time in vision and possibility and potential and how could we make XYZ happen. I like detailed people, and I like to be surrounded by detailed people. I like people who want to dig into the very, very bottom of something. Our COO at Food52, I tease her that she's a Google Doc. Like she is a living Google Doc. I have zero patience to live in Google Docs. She loves Google Docs. So I like to have those kind of people around me.
Do you think it's hard sometimes? I have this problem where you like to work hard and you have a lot of stamina, and you might have someone really smart that doesn't match your stamina, but does other things that you don't do. How do you balance the kind of empathy for they work in a different style than I do?
It's an acquired skill, I would say. I really have had to work at that, to be honest with you. I think earlier in my career, I would be very judgmental and very impatient. Like if people couldn't keep the same pace, do the same thing, I would get irritated. I still kind of get irritated, but I do less about it, if that makes sense. And, look, there's people who process very fast and have a very quick bias to action. I tend to be in that bucket. And then there are people who process more thoughtfully and marinate over a longer period of time. And they typically come up with things that the fast processing, trigger happy people miss. And so it's interesting that you mentioned it, Jason, because it's something that I'm really working on, which is how do I give those people their space and their time and have the acceptance that it's not going to be 1,000 things that get done. It's going to be 5 things, but those 5 things are going to be brilliant.
Yeah. And it's your job to figure out what those 5 things are.
Yeah.
So you don't, burn everyone out. But it's
that's right.
It's very, very hard when in this, market, you need to move fast, right? And speed is important. And overthinking can be a hindrance, right?
Definitely.
It can be a hindrance. So it's tough. So just on Barstool, and I don't want to go too deep into Barstool. I want to really focus on Food52, but Vanity Fair called Barstool a pirate ship, somewhat of a chaotic environment that you were leading. Does that work for your skills? Do you like?
Yeah, I love chaos. I'm very happy in chaos. I don't need a lot of certainty. I don't need things to be consistent. I don't need predictability, and I don't need certainty. It can make me difficult to work with because I like to throw 1,000 things in the air and see what sticks. I struggle to work with people who need predictability and certainty. But it's also why I loved Barstool, right? Because nothing was predictable. Absolutely nothing was certain. Everything was chaotic. I really, truly believe that's why we were so successful.
What are some insights from your time there? Some of those things that you wanted to see if they would stick that led to an outsized impact.
The thing that we implemented was that we were unafraid of failing. Like the idea that we might not fail never occurred to anyone there, whether we were launching a new show, whether we were launching a product, whether we were launching a talent or a personality. The company DNA was just outright fearless. And I think that was part of what made us so successful. And then, we launched a lot of things. We created a vodka with Gallo called Pink Whitney, which, we came out of an ad read. It was a 2-sentence, throwaway comment that we turned into a massive, massive business. We built a college network. We built an NIL, so athlete name and likeness network. So we initiated a tremendous amount, mostly because I don't think it occurred to us that we could fail. And even when we did fail, we just moved on to the next thing.
In your Nobody Cares About Your Career book that recently came out a couple months ago, you do talk about why failure is good. The Barstool, that mantra was, we're not going to fail. But of course, things that you launch, some succeed and some don't.
Yeah.
Tell me more about why failure, in your opinion, is a good thing.
So one of the things I write about in my book is that success is a horrible teacher and failure is a great teacher. And success, I think, is a horrible teacher because you get arrogant. The more successful you are, you get complacent, you get arrogant. You think you know more than you do, and you become a little bit obtuse about the things I think that can hurt you. And the reason I think failure is such a good teacher is it just keeps you fresh. It keeps you alert. It keeps your head on a swivel. And, at Barstool, we were insanely successful because we failed all the time, every day, and so there was so much failure, it became success, if that makes sense. And I think that's why, I believe so much in trying so many different things, because if you don't try, you won't know.
How would you know when something has failed and you have to let it go versus we just need more time on the site?
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance that? What's your barometer? Do you just have great instincts on that thing's never going to work, even though we tried it?
No, I don't think I do. I'm trying to. I think, you always have to look at the numbers. The numbers will tell you the truth. And I think you can know if something fails by if it attracts any heat or not. So if you're in a consumer business, right, which is, where I've spent the majority of my career, by the numbers. So if we were launching a piece of content, or we do it at Food52, we launch a product or a design or a piece of content, pretty instantly by virtue of how many views it gets, by how many comments it creates, by how many likes it has, if it's resonating or not. And I tend to watch the small stuff really closely because I think it's a better barometer for if something can succeed. I think there's certainly things I've let go on too long. And there's probably a couple things that I've killed too soon, but I also think you've got to constantly prune your garden, because otherwise you just end up with a lot of a little.
A lot of a little. I like the pruning the garden analogy. So how did you know that Food52 was the right next step for you?
Food52 checked a couple boxes for me. One is that it was an odd choice, I would say. I think most people expected me to still work in sports. I'm still really involved in sports. I sit on the board of the PLL. I love sports. But I spent a decade obsessing over 18 to 34-year-olds, and mostly men. And I was like, I can market to a 25-year-old white guy in my sleep at this point. So I really wanted something different. I wanted a different consumer. I wanted a different audience. I wanted a different business model. I wanted a company that more spoke to things that I would be interested in. And so that's, and I wanted something that I wanted a startup. I didn't want to go into a big company, and Food52 checked a lot of that for me.
What was the shape of the brand when you started working there? And how are you working towards a new future for Food 52?
I think the brand was pretty injured when I got there, is how I would describe it. A little lost. Like a lot of companies in the home space and the retail space, and COVID was in an insane time, right? This boom and the supply chain issues and the delusion that this demand would go on forever and the spending that came with it. And, a lot of times startups, it's so hard because you're in this dance of chasing growth, but also managing cost. And I think one of the things that I got good at Barstool was that I understand how to grow on a low cost basis. I understood how to not spend a whole lot of money to achieve growth. One of the challenges that was facing Food 52 was that they had spent a lot of money and the growth wasn't following. So, I think the brand has made incredible strides since I got there. I still think we have so far to go. We have Dansk, we have Schoolhouse, and we have Food 52. So we have 3 consumer brands. I think all brands are on a journey. These 3 are no exception, and I'm excited to see where that can end up. And I think we're on the right track.
It's interesting you say that about the COVID bump, because we helped build Peloton for 7 years when no one knew who they were, and they absolutely crushed it during the pandemic. I go back to what you said earlier about I'm paraphrasing, but success can blind you. And I think that is exactly what happened in that story. Overinvesting, the overspending, building warehouses, having tons of extra product. And then all of a sudden it sort of, fell off. And I think that is really going back to what you said, is success can blind you that it's always going to be like that.
Yeah.
And it's not the case. And it's just an interesting note. So when you came to Food 52, how do you think about the 3 brands? And do you think about combining those together? Is that part of your future plan, or do you run them separately?
We will combine some aspects. The brands themselves, I don't think should be combined. And I actually feel really strongly about that. I don't like when distinct brands become kind of homogenized by being lumped with one another. So
they lose their differentiation.
Yeah. And then you're like, we'll just make one brand then. You know what I mean? So, I think there will be supply chain, finance, HR, growth strategies, there will be, planning, buying, there will be skills and divisions of our company that support all 3. But the products themselves, the design themselves, the marketing, the positioning, I think has to remain very distinct.
As you're building Food 52, how much do you think about, maybe from your experience in the past, building that community and building community around the brand? And how do you think about that, if you can talk a little bit about it?
I mean, community is everything, right? Like Barstool is a massive community. I don't think community is monolithic, though. I think community follows people now more than anything else. Maybe community always kind of did, but we need to create. I think it's very arrogant when brands think, oh, I'm going to build this, and then a community is going to come to me and they're going to adopt me and they're going to love me and they're going to spend all their time and then they're going to spend their money with me. I think that's kind of bullshit. I think brands have to earn I think everything flipped. And the internet put the consumer in charge, and the social networks put the consumers in platforms that only the social networks own. And so the challenge now for brands, including Food 52 and Dansk and Schoolhouse, is to earn their way into communities that already exist. So in Food 52's case, that could be homebodies, that could be home cooks, that could be vegans, that could be home organizing freaks, whatever it may be, you've got to earn your way there. Schoolhouse, same, is lighting enthusiasts and design enthusiasts and interior designers. So I think brands have to earn their way into communities. And we will work on that. Community has always been a core underpinning of the Food 52 brand in particular. When Amanda Hesser and Meryl Stubbs created it, they created products because their community told them what to make. We will get back to doing that, but we will do it in places that live all around the internet.
What is your vision for Food 52? What do you want it to become?
I'm interested in Food 52 becoming a company that creates or curates insanely distinct design, whether it's lighting or furniture or textiles or cookware or tabletop, very distinct design, vintage design, American made design, design we manufacture in Portland, a distinct design company, because I think brands come out of product and design. The second is we will be a content company and a media network that creates content that speaks to communities in all different places on the web. And then we will be a community. And that community will be of people who love our lighting and design and our furniture and our products and our point of view. And it will be people who love the content that we create, and to really create a company that centers around all three.
Right. And that works really well because you have this North Star idea, and then it can be brought to those other brands.
Exactly.
And so you don't have three visions, you have one vision, and then that's integrated. And that makes a lot of sense because that keeps everyone going towards the same page, even though they have different brands. Yeah, that's a good structure. What do you look for when you're thinking about, changing the company and this big vision? What do you look for when you hire people and, kind of augment your talent?
I am looking for kind of what I said at the beginning, like sharp, adaptable, relentless people. That's DNA wise really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people who understand the internet and who understand modern ways of doing things. I like to hire out of comedy. I think people in comedy have to grind it out. That business is a grind. And I like people who come from that space. Most people who work in home and lifestyle do not come from comedy. So I'm also liking that we're building DNA here that I think will be very different than most other home good companies. But I like people from the internet.
I think there's a connection here between how Food 52 is disrupting the space, and you're also disrupting it by who you bring in to disrupt that space.
I'm trying to disrupt Food 52 so that Food 52 can in turn disrupt something else.
Yeah, right. You have a disruptive way of bringing talent in that's going to allow you to do that.
Yeah, I'll give you, this is stupid, but I'll give you an example. So I found this woman on the internet, on Instagram. I don't know what country she lives in. I looked at the currency. It was a currency I'd never heard of. And I paid her $400 to make a brand book. And in the course of a week, she made this insanely creative brand book. And I'm like, gosh, maybe this lady should work at Food 52. So I think there's all sorts of ways where you can look to the world and look to the internet. To people who have to hustle I think are great hires.
Right.
People who are used to doing a lot with very little direction and very little resource, I think is really powerful.
How do you get in your role the freedom to guide the company the way you want, do what you want? I mean, obviously you have to answer to the money people at the end of the day, right? And how do you navigate that, the balance of you've got to answer and report to someone, but you also need the space and freedom to throw elbows and build this the way?
Yeah, I think this was hard. This was a hard thing for me to learn. The first time, in my early startups, I was always so afraid of the investors and the money people that I let them in too much. And then they kind of ran me, right? I ended up working on whatever the investor wanted worked on versus what the business actually needed. And so one thing I've gotten better at, which, I'm pretty vigilant about it now, is that I talk to our board all the time, right? On text and calls. I'm sitting in our board's office right now, our investor's office right now. We have a very comfortable relationship, but I only talk about our results once a month. And I'm like, we're going to talk about our results once a month. And that's when we talk about our results. Like, don't ask me next Wednesday. Don't ask me 2 Fridays from now. Like, the meeting is once a month. So I think having discipline, and I encourage people in Food 52 or really any company to do this, is that, I don't know, if you want to be efficient about marketing feedback, then have one marketing meeting a week and get all the feedback and force the feedback in that meeting. So I try to force things so that I'm not running on everybody else's agenda, but I'm more so able to focus on where I think my time should be spent. I'm also a little intense, so I have to busy myself with other stuff because I think I would drive the Food 52 people nuts. So I try to also focus my energy that way, where I show up, I give thoughts, we collaborate, we make things happen. And then I know I have to leave people alone for a little bit so that they can do the thing. And then I go spin up 10 other things for myself in that time.
But the investor relationship advice, I think, is really golden. It's not to, put a Heisman and like push them out. It's to bring them in, but also organize the way you feed key information, right? Like you can
definitely
informal relationship and ask questions or get advice or whatever you need. But then it's very organized in when you're talking about KPIs and ROI and results. That's very organized and don't deviate from that.
Yeah. The other thing is, I'm always super blunt about the bad news. So, it was funny. I was on the board of Food 52 before joining Food 52. And we would have board meetings where it was the numbers parade. There'd be the spreadsheet tossed up and there's 4,000 cells and, you can't even understand what the fuck anybody's talking about. I don't like to roll like that.
I just came back from one of those meetings.
Oh, it's the worst. Yeah. I'm like, this is just a waste of my time. Like, it's the worst. Like, what is actually happening here? So my other piece is I'm just really blunt about what's not going well. And I always here's what's going well. Here's what's not going well. Here's what I need help on. And here's what, something I can't figure out. And I'd love your brains on that. So I try to, all investors get confused and at some point think they're operators, which they're not. And I think our investors are not good operators. I'm not a good investor. So it's like, that's cool. You stay on that side of the fence. I'm going to stay on this side of the fence, but let's meet at the fence and talk about what we should do. And I think that's also an important perspective.
What other advice would you give entrepreneurs or business leaders that are either starting or joining another company where, disruption is important and changing an existing industry model is important?
Yeah, I think all companies are being disrupted right now. Like if you look at AI, AI we are in a time of insane creativity and the machines are going to disrupt everything. And one is, I think, to read as much as you can. I think Substack is incredible. I try to read about disruption and marketing and media and home. I try to listen to every earnings report that I can, or I ask ChatGPT to translate them. So one is just being a student of the industry you're in is really important because it gives you perspective. And then the second piece is there's always someone smaller and scrappier than you that you can learn from and I think not being so traditional or so rigid about reaching out to people for connection and just DM someone if you want to meet with them. I found this guy on Twitter or on X who was tweeting about or do you say Xing now? He was tweeting. He was tweeting about his financial modeling software and his perspective on the consumer goods industry. So I just DM'd him and was like, hey, why don't you come to New York and come sit with me for 2 hours? And, you can pitch us your software, but I'm actually more interested in how you think. And I do that stuff all day long.
Are there any lessons about scaling from, I don't know, maybe at Barstool or your experience in the past about the right way to scale, how fast to scale? How do you keep the essence and core of what you're trying to do, but also, take advantage of where you are? And
that's the hardest thing there is, I think. Barstool, we scaled like crazy. And it's such a ride. It's such a luxury. It's such a luxury to have crazy growth. What I think we did really well at Barstool was we stayed authentic, which is in large part due to the talent and due to Dave. I think when you're scaling quickly, you have to constantly be assessing yourself. Like you said it, like stay frosty.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to go through a lot of staff. And I think people look at that sometimes as a bad thing. I think it's a great thing. Like the people who are great, Barstool, we went from, I don't know, $3 to $5 million in revenue. And 8 years later, we were doing 350 million. Like it was a bananas run.
That's insane.
But it also meant that the like $10 million people weren't awesome at 60. And the 60 people weren't awesome at 200. And so really, I just didn't want to get fired. So I was like, I got to keep developing, changing my skills so that I can stay in the seat. And I think that's something that is good for people to learn, which is the more a company grows and evolves, you have to be adaptable, right? I see this at Food52 all the time, which is this desire for control, like just a desire for control over something and a wish that things would be static. And the reality is that it's such a luxury that things aren't static. My dad used to always say this, like the best control is no control. And the more you let go, the more you can learn, the more you can be part of things, the more you test yourself, which ultimately makes you most viable. I think when a company is winning and very decisively and obviously winning, it's easier to move fast. The morale kind of goes with that.
Winning kind of solves everything.
It does.
Glosses over a lot of things.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I'm on the board of Axon, which is an awesome company, and we had their board meeting. Their stock is at an all-time high. It's the fastest moving stock on the S&P 500, and it was like it's easy to have a board meeting when your stock is up, X 36%. It's hard to have it when it's down.
Adaptability. You've got to be adaptable. Tell me about your book and the experience writing it. How long did it take you? Did you enjoy it? Were you just like, oh, thank God that's done?
It's a lot of I felt like my ass got bigger. It's just like a lot of sitting. I'm like too much ADHD for that. It just was a lot of sitting.
Yeah.
I liked it. It took me 2 years. I think almost 2 years.
Pretty good.
I liked it. I found it very emotional. I had a lot to say. I think my publisher was like, stop writing. Like, I think they thought it would be this big and it ended up being this big. I liked it. I found it made me kind of foggy for that 2 years because I was always writing in my head and kind of saving it up. But I don't know. It's written like a conversation, and I don't think there's a whole lot of business books like that. I couldn't find any business books that I wanted to read. I either felt like because I was a female, I was supposed to be reading something that was like a pump-up speech, or it was like, some habit you can adapt in 5 minutes or adopt in 5 minutes, or about people who are perfect, and I'm not perfect. So I think it's unique in the space, and I put a lot into it.
I love the name. Nobody cares about your career.
It's a good thing for people to remember. People actually don't care about your career. And, I think some people can think that's a negative, but I actually think it's a huge positive in that one is nobody's coming to help you but yourself. So you might as well start helping you. And two is that even when you screw up and you make a gaffe or you fall, that really nobody cares anyways. Everyone's so consumed with their own careers and their own lives that don't be afraid of that.
How do you manage your stress and handle the pressure of your various roles?
That's a good question. I don't know that I'm great at managing stress. I'm trying to be. I think I can deplete myself, which is not a great skill. Like I get to Friday night and I'm like limping, so that I don't love about myself.
How do you fill your cup up then when you're like,
I love to sleep. I love to play cards. I like to be outside. I try to do it all on the weekend. But I think it's having a little bit of perspective. I can, I like to initiate a lot of stuff. Sometimes I initiate too much. And so I think it's all about like, okay, what are we really trying to solve for? I always try to reframe to put my energy there.
Do you find that having had a lot of success, that there's more or less pressure on you now?
I don't care about. That does not stress me out. There probably is a lot of pressure on me, and there's probably expectations that may or may not be realistic. I don't really care what other people think. I don't worry about that at all.
Right. That's awesome.
I don't care. I do care about, like, are we making the right moves? Am I making the right decisions? Should I have done something differently? Should I do something differently now? My head is more there.
All right. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I have one more question for you. Do you have a mantra or a quote or a philosophy that you live by to balance, everything that you're trying to accomplish?
Ooh, that's a great question, Jason. I think you have to be kind and be interested in people. I think you have to have honest intentions. You have to try to have good intentions. If you have good intentions, you won't always get everything right, but it generally will work out.
I love that. Good intentions. All right. Well, thanks for being on the Soul and Science podcast. It was great chatting with you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Soul and Science is a Mechanism podcast produced by Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, and Lily Jablonski. The show is edited by Daniel Ferreira with theme music by Kyle Merritt. And I'm your host, Jason Harris.